Good
morning.
morning. Good morning, Mario Andretti. Welcome to the Formula One News Hour. It is great, and it's a privilege to have this opportunity to talk to you. You know, for years, and years ago when we were both kids, I used to watch you a lot. I never dreamed that one day I'd get to meet you. I got to meet you last year. You probably don't remember. After you got out the Formula One car, and you were talking to Martin Brundle and those guys. I was there also, and I happened to mention to you, I was probably the only one old enough there to be able to remember your days driving Formula One cars. So it's a great privilege, and I want to thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure, Jonathan.
So you know, we both started our lives on the other side of the pond. Maybe you could give me, before we get going with the questions, just give us a little, you know, how did Mario Andretti end up, you know, from that side of the pond? I know you were a kid, like in your, I think 14 or something when you came over here. But maybe just give the folks here a sense of how somebody as a kid grows up over there, becomes a Formula One world champion, and probably one of the greatest race car drivers of all time.
Well, it's hard to know even where to start, because it's very unlikely, you know, with my upbringing, that this could be the you know, the pattern of my life. You know, as far as why did I become so you know, interested in the sport, and it was primarily through the media. You know, when I was just a youngster, still living in Italy. My twin brother and I were just captured by the you know, what was going on in Formula One in those days. You know, Italy being such a protagonist, you know, with all of again, you know, starting with Farina winning officially the first world championship, and then having Alberto Ascari, you know, another world champion with Ferrari. And again, they were at the forefront of all the other sports. In fact, in those days, the Formula One, as far as the sporting news, was even more popular than calcio, than, you know, than football. So, or soccer, I should say.
Yeah. Well, we both call it football, so that's okay.
There anyway. But anyway, so anyway, just to get back to your question, we just were attracted to it, and after seeing the Formula One race in 1954 at age 14 in Monza, you know, we put in so many ways. I mean, my life, you know, all of a sudden I had no plan B for my life after that for some reason. I was, you know, so enthralled over everything, and I said, dear God, if there's anything that I could possibly ask for my life, you know, to give me the opportunity to find a way to become a race driver. And when we came to America in 1955, we found out 2 days after arriving here, there was a local racetrack, you know, where they do just Sunday night racing, Saturday night, Sunday night racing here in America at a fairground. And then 2 years later, we started building, my brother and I and 4 other friends started building a car to race there. And we had to figure out, how do we start, you know? And there was one way to do it. And things went extremely well, you know, right from the beginning. I guess we had you know, the geek in the group that knew everything and steered us you know, in the right direction. And so, but after that, you know, my objective was first opportunity to get into single seaters, which I consider that the purest form of our sport, and then progress from there. You know, so again, but why I was drawn to this, I'll never know. There was nothing in our family. There was my dad, my only had an uncle on my mother's side that was kind of he was always in motorcycles and sort of thing. So he looked like the sporty type of guy that was, as a child he wanted to emulate, but nothing about racing.
Interesting, very interesting. So let's go back. Let's go back to those days. And my first question is, and I wrote them down because I'm getting up there in years too, and my memory's not quite what it used to be. So you grew up around like Jack Brabham, Colin Chapman, Bruce McLaren, Frank Williams, and Ken Tyrrell, and they were just pioneers of the sport. I think we both you knew Colin Chapman very well, but we could both agree that these guys were incredible, not because they were drivers and building. They designed and built kind of the cars that we're seeing today. That the evolution of the cars that are today started with those guys. Do you think we're ever going to see guys like those again, or do you think the sport has advanced to really just teams and technology? We got a guy designing engines, a guy designing bodies, a guy designing aerodynamics, a guy designing suspensions. In those days, those guys were the ones doing a lot of that stuff.
Well, that's true, but as you said, that the days of pioneers are definitely over, because there was so much to be learned during that era about the sport, and the sport has evolved to the point that if you look back to even the early '90s, there was telemetry back to the pits where they were adjusting the car, the chassis, from telemetry, from with a computer while they were running. There was they used to program the circuit, the gearbox, where there was everything automatic. I remember when Michael was there, he said, "Oh my goodness!" And so now I think the trick is to try to regulate the sport so it still is a sport. So the drivers actually have to do their own work. Things are easier, paddle shifting and all that, and you have you cannot over rev an engine even on a downshift. They have all of those protections, which makes everything very reliable, as you can see. But at the same time, again, we know so much now that the sport is regulated in a totally different way. So to answer your question about about pioneers, yeah, those days are over. Those pioneers that you mentioned will be there forever, and they'll be the ones that we would look back to and say they're responsible for getting us to where we are today.
Yeah, and looking back at yesteryear, guys like you and Clark and Hill and Stewart and all those guys from that era, you didn't start in open wheel cars. You started in closed wheel cars and sports cars, rally cars, all kinds of different cars. Formula One came along later. How do you think the drivers of today would fare getting into Formula One that way, and how, looking at the different styles of drivers and how they get there, how can you look at those drivers and say, well, we had these skills and those guys don't have those. A lot of the guys today, in fact, the only way to Formula One today, I think, is through karting, just about. So how do you think that your skill set compared to their skill set today, and how does their skill set compare to your skill set of yesteryear?
Well, that side is quite complicated to some degree, but a lot of it comes down to what your objectives are. How much desire do you have to really get to where you want to be, and where do you want to be to the top? So you're not going to start from there. So it's whatever is available at the time. Right now, from a driver's standpoint, like you say, you could start. They have some fantastic go-karting, that you could just try to hone some of your early skills there, but then you can go to Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2, and so on and so forth if you want to get to Formula 1. And other series in NASCAR, they have trucks, and then they have Xfinity, and so on until you get to Cup Series. Indy cars, again, you have a ladder to the top. So the sport is so much more organized. But here again, in the times when you didn't have all those opportunities there, so you did whatever you could, and you were always, to be able to succeed in anything, you have to be driven by a burning desire to just achieve whatever you can, whichever way, in whichever, way possible. And we all had different opportunities, as you said, if whether it was rallying, whether it was anything like that. For me, it was originally the stock car. Did I want to make a career there? Hell no, but there was a way to be seen, to be evaluated. And what's the best way to be evaluated? You have to start winning. You have to win. And I got into 3/4 midgets, and how do you go from there to full-size midget? You have to win, earn your way. I earned my way right through all of these different series. But my aim was always at the top. I mean, I was driving a midget in 1963, and I was dreaming of being in a Formula One car. I was being ready to get pushed off to win my third feature of the day. And who was I thinking about? I was thinking about Dan Gurney, who just got a ride in Formula One. That was his first experience in Formula One. I was thinking of Dan Gurney when I was in a midget on a 1/3 of a mile dirt track in Hatfield, New Jersey. Hatfield, Pennsylvania.
So
yeah,
that actually,
you know what I mean?
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah,
The desire. What I'm hearing come through from you is there was always a desire to get better and better and better, and you always had an end goal, and no matter what, you're going to achieve that goal.
Exactly. And I can only speak for myself, obviously,
Sure.
but we all have, you talk to 10 different drivers, you're going to hear 10 different stories. But the bottom line is desire, the burning desire to just achieve something, to get there. You have a clear objective. And sometimes it seems like the impossible dream. And that's even good, because then you figure, then you're really, really going to go for it. And then you're going to appreciate even more. Once you get there, you're going to drive harder not to lose it. That's what it was with me. It's you see today, with my own kids, for instance, they didn't have to beg or just and dream about, being something, being a champion driver, because all I had to do is say it. I'd have a go-kart for them. I'd have, something to start. I could pave the way for them. And so I don't know if that's good or bad. I know I would not change anything that I've experienced, because I think I was driven by the impossible dream. And you get a kid, that sees an ice cream cone, and then okay, but it's not so big, so they're going to enjoy it. But you give them a big pot of ice cream, well, it's there. Okay, I can have that anytime. You know what I mean?
Yes. Interesting.
It's what you can have sometimes that really drives you. Gotta have it. So you're going to use all of your energy, everything possible, to try to get to that point. So that's what it was with me. I know, and it worked, actually.
So talking about kids, I'm not going in order of the questions. I'm going to jump in now because it's really interesting. A lot of sports figures, personalities, whether it's football, soccer, tennis, basketball, motor racing, you very rarely see children as good as their parents, or as good as their father or the mother or whatever it is. You've got an amazing family, because you've got not only a son that's been a world-class driver, you've got a grandson that was a world-class driver. You were talking a little bit about helping them, but did they have that same drive, that same goal as you did, or did you push them a little bit? And then the last part of the question, I guess you're old enough to have great grandchildren. So is there another Andretti coming along behind Marco or somebody?
Well, that we'll have to wait and see. But as far as like I said, visiting what I said earlier, um, my my kids, my grandkids, they were sort of born around this environment. Like my sons, for instance, they attended races. They had my young sons when they were, before even their teen years, or right at the beginning of their teen years, they started traveling with me. Even I would take them even one at a time to have more quality time with a single one to Europe, to the Formula One races. So they were introduced, they were part of this life. And so it was, up to them, to make that decision. I don't feel, I know that I never pushed them, but I made that available. Like both my sons at the 9 years of age, I put them in a go-kart where I laid out a course in a parking lot in back of a school nearby. And I said, okay, go for it, and then they started racing competitively. And my son Michael, especially, I mean, he was like a duck to water. He just winning was the only thing for him. So right through all of the systems, he was always, he won, and right up to the top. So and he was driven, by that desire to just win. Once you experience that, um, and but there's a different personality. That his younger brother was driven, but not as intense for
Yeah.
some reason. So it's all about personality. There's some things that you either have in your belly or you don't, and
Right.
and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just each individual has his own objectives, and there's things that satisfy certain people in different ways, and there's no way, and you don't have to criticize. It's just the way it is. We're not all equal. And my grandson here again, I mean, he had the opportunity. My son put him in a go-kart at the same age, at 9 years of age,
Mhm.
and he was winning there, and he was doing all the things. So he came through the ranks, which is what's available. But again, it's still, I mean, and today, Marco is satisfied with just driving just Indianapolis. He could drive the whole series. Do you fault that? No, I mean, that's his choice. We
Sure.
all make our choices. It's what really satisfies you. For instance, many drivers are. I know it's part of your question. I saw that many drivers, are totally satisfied in specializing just one top category, and make a beautiful career out of that. And others are not satisfied with that. I was one of them. I was very curious about what was going on in the other categories, top categories of our sport. Our sport is rich of that. You have Formula One, you have Indy cars, you have, the stock car world. You have sports prototypes, which is a national or international. And I wanted to taste all of it if I could. I mean, I was going from a dirt track, even, back in the 70s. I was going from dirt track racing, to Formula One, sometime almost within a week. And you know what I
That
mean?
brings up an
I already won my first Formula One race, like in '71 in South Africa. I was already on pole in Formula One, and earlier, 4 or 5 years earlier, and I won the national dirt track championship in 1974. You see what I mean? But
crazy.
that's what was really. I mean, that was the fire that I had under me, that I wanted to cultivate. And I derived so much satisfaction out of being able to conquer, these different categories, the different styles of driving.
Yeah, and that is one of my questions. When you look back at guys like yourself and others of that era, you could jump from one car to another, all different types of race cars and win, right? And you just don't see that very much today. And I'm wondering if technology is part of that, that the cars themselves technologically that they're so different from different cars to different cars. And like in suspension and all of those kinds of things that make the driving of them a lot different. Like when you drove right from a sports car to a dirt track car to a Formula One car, a lot of the suspensions and everything I'm thinking of those times were probably pretty similar. So no, okay.
Not that at all. Not that at all. Each, I tell you, I don't want to interrupt you, but each category is totally different today, like it was yesterday. And quite honestly, and each one of these particular, if you go into these different, the animal is different. You can't treat it the same, but there's one feel that you go for, the balance, that is the same. But it's up to the driver to understand also what he or she wants. That's the other thing, so it's, but I felt that there's also a correlation between that. I learned, I'll give you, for instance, what's more different? What's like apples and oranges, like Formula One or dirt track racing? What did I learn that sort of mashes in there? I learned driver control, drive control, and also looking for grip. Now, I learned something in dirt track racing that helped me in the wet races on the road courses. Why? Because in dirt track racing, you never almost drive the same line each lap. You always look for grip. And that's what you do in the wet races. In the wet race, you drive and maybe a line is totally different than, than the dry. So you're always searching. And so there's a correlation there. So by being exposed to the different categories, I think it opens up your horizon, your knowledge, I think, in certain areas, and to be able to take advantage of that, and in certain situations that obviously, to your benefit.
And that brings us to another question. A lot of the guys from your era, I mean, they could tear the cars apart. They knew exactly how they worked and all that kind of stuff. And they would relay that information back to the teams and stuff like that. And yes, technology does a lot of that today. But like you were just talking about in the car setup, do you think it would help if the drivers of today learned a little more about the mechanical and the engineering behind the car, so that they could help relay some of that information back to the teams?
Now you touched on my pet peeve that I have, because it's exactly right. I think, the majority of the drivers today probably rely too much on just the engineer. They rely on the data, and they go by that, and, without having enough input to help that. I mean, what makes Adrian Newey the best engineer going today by far? Because he uses his practical knowledge, plus, obviously, everything that you can learn from data and all of that technology at your disposal. But never understate the importance of that practical knowledge. And by that I mean, what I found, and like I said, I can only speak for myself, that the more I learn about the dynamics of not just aerodynamics, but suspension dynamics and so forth, the more I was able to help myself make things easier as a driver, to understand and relate that, to the engineer, and the engineer helped me. So in other words, you got to have, if you have both, you come to a solution a lot easier than just going one-sided. If you come in and you tell the engineer, I just can't drive this thing, I don't know where to start. Okay, so they're going to try this, we're going to try. It's the same as going to a doctor. You go to a doctor, say, "Doc, I don't feel good. I just don't." Okay, what's wrong? I don't know. So where the heck is the doctor going to go? You see what I mean?
Right.
So it's like that. It's a doctor-patient thing. the more specific you are. When you go to a doctor, hey doc, it's this, this, and that. So the doctor can zero right in, and the driver and engineer is exactly the same. And I see today, I sit up, I'm up there on a perch, and I watch when during practice and so forth, the drivers come in and so forth, and okay, what was the COP? Well, I would come in, I didn't care what the COP was, on the computer. I would come in and I said, just put, a quarter of a degree, half degree on the front or the rear wing, and then look where the COP percentage is. And then nail that in, but go by your own feel. Now what the computer says. You see what I mean? It's just
right. No, big time. Yes.
There's different ways of going about it. And the drivers that actually can help themselves in that direction, those are the ones that are always up front because they'll be consistent. And you have those, the ones that are at the top usually have that quality. Trust me, that's the way it is. But like I said, it's sometimes relying so much on just on a computer, on your engineer alone.
Yeah.
You're missing something. You're bound to.
Yeah, the engineer can't feel the wheels on the road like you can when you're driving the car, right?
Amen.
And that's a big part of it. So very interesting. It was interesting just this last weekend because Martin Brundle, who he grew up working in his dad's garage and everything, and so he was part of those teams. And Max this weekend lost a drive shaft, and he reported back to the team that he'd lost his engine. And Martin Brundle from the sidelines says, "No, I think he's lost an axle." Right. And so that there you saw that experience, that base knowledge that's really needed, that I think the drivers could really help their teams if they just, spend a little more time and really got to understand exactly how the cars work and what makes them stick to the ground and what makes them go.
Max Verstappen is so fortunate to have Adrian Newey up there on the perch.
Yeah, yes, he is.
Difference. Trust me. I put my bet on Adrian Newey all day. I work with him. There's no better engineer on this planet right now than Adrian Newey. That's only because I've experienced what he can contribute, how he can contribute. And, Max Verstappen, they're fabulous driver, no question. I mean, but the package is there. You see what I mean? And so, like I said, he can rely so much on Adrian because Adrian drives actually himself. He loves to get into his vintage cars and so forth. He really understands the dynamics of everything. And so when the driver comes in or whatever the driver says, he gets it, and so that's the important thing there.
Yeah, and talking of that takes me back to you knew Colin Chapman very, very well over the years. I was a great admirer of Colin Chapman. I think there's things going on in the cars today that he pioneered, and they're still with us today. And Adrian's using a lot of that knowledge that he picked up from there. What was he like as a person? What was he when he wasn't? Because I've read things that you'd come in and say, "Hey, Colin, the car needs this and this." And he wasn't kind of a planner. He'd just dive in and start making all the changes and stuff like that. How did you find him as a person outside of the racing world and everything? Who was Colin Chapman?
He was dynamic. That's the only way to describe him in every way. He was extremely intelligent, as you can imagine, and so he was. It was interest no matter what, whether you were at dinner, a casual conversation, or in the business side. For me, what was really good about Colin, like the relationship we had right on the track, I would come in and he kept throwing stuff at me, what about this? What about that? What about it? So he kept, he kept my brain really working. You know what I mean? And now and then I felt like slapping him. I said, "How could you?" But he just there was just something there that was really good for me, and he knew it. He knew what, but he was just throwing. I said, "Oh yeah, that. Let's try that type of thing." And so that was the relationship that we had. But when Colin was on, he was really on. When he and I was fortunate enough to be able, to take advantage of that side, that era. If you look at his career, it was peaks and valleys. But when he was really concentrating on the beast of the moment, he was as good as anyone ever. And that's why he had the success that he had. And if you were the lucky driver at the time when he was really on it, you had a shot at the world championship.
That's true. I read it from some of the other drivers' comments on Colin that said some of them were actually scared to drive his cars sometimes because they didn't know if they were going to stay together and stuff. Because during the '60s, especially, there was a lot of guys lost their lives driving race cars. Did you ever feel that way? Were you ever, when you were in that car, did you ever think, I'm a little scared of this car or something like that?
Well, I was concerned about some of that sort of thing because Colin, he wanted to give the drivers as much of an unfair advantage as possible, which was a lot of it. His fetish was about the weight, power to weight ratio and all that.
Yeah.
Is very important, and I had a great relationship with the mechanics, and and one in particular, Bob Dance, which is still around, and we obviously speak with each other, once in a while, and anyway, I would say, Bob, if you ever see anything that's questionable or something suspension wise or whatever. Just do what you have to do. I said we want to be able to race another day.
Another day.
Yeah.
So talking of weight, so the drivers today, and I did an interview with David Coulthard a couple of months back. They spend an enormous amount of time staying fit, both physically and mentally. Did you do that at the time? I mean, race car drivers have always, over history, been very fit people, but did you have some of the routines that they have today, or did you just like go jogging or running or lifting weights? How did you stay fit and sharp?
Jonathan, by being in a race car. Do you know how many races I would do a year?
Yes.
If a fighter fights every week, you think he's going to be out in the gym every day? No. I needed some rest between the races. Quite honestly, as far as my physical condition, I wanted to be fit enough that I was as productive on the last lap of the race as I was in the first one physically.
Yes.
Because you look at yourself in the mirror the next day. Okay, should I have finished second instead of fifth because physically I was falling apart at the end? I never had that. And, there was some races where, I was really, really hanging on for dear life, but I was still, giving it. And then if I needed to strengthen my neck or whatever, you do all that. I worried about that myself, and there was a sense of pride that went along with that. Yeah. I don't think in today, especially on the top level, you do as many races, that so in between, you got to do what you got to do to stay up on top physically, no question. There's today, because it's regulated, there's not as much testing going on. You're not allowed to. We were testing when I was out of a race car at the end of the season. I was in testing every single week somewhere, the new product, a new car coming in, or this and that, or in this category, or that category, either sports cars or whatever. Always, I was always in a race car. And so, again, talking to me about that, it's a personal thing. I mean, it's up to you as an individual to know what you need to be totally efficient, throughout the event. And again, I I thought I did what I needed to do for myself. I didn't miss a thing, and only like I said, I was in that ring every single week, and
Yeah.
whatever time I had in between, I needed to rest.
Well, your record speaks for itself. So, but you got to drive the 2014 McLaren at Coda last year. How did it compare? I mean, obviously the cars are very, very different, but just the feel of the car and stuff like that. How did it compare to that car you won the championship in back in '78?
Well, you can't compare that. I mean, obviously there's too much technology in between and so forth.
Right.
But I'm up to speed on things, so I was not surprised at all. With what the car was giving. What I was lacking is a proper setting in the cockpit. I mean, I was just it was a disaster the way there was. They could not adjust the car. The pedals and
Right.
so forth in so many ways. So I was very uncomfortable there. So I couldn't really go after it, the way I wanted to. But did I get the feel that I was looking for? Yes. And there was no surprise whatsoever. It's just everything that I expected it to be, and it was wonderful.
Would you have liked to have been driving these cars today back in the late '60s and '70s?
I would love to drive today's cars, absolutely. I always look forward, never look back, quite
Yeah.
honestly. Technology is something that always kept me motivated. I was part of so many new innovations, in the cars throughout my career. Yeah, I never look back, and I never say, "Oh, yeah, that's where." No, I go. I like the latest and greatest. That's all I can tell you.
Good. Okay, a couple of last questions. The first one is, out of all the cars that you drove over your career, which one just gave you the most joy, the sheer pleasure, and you could just wish you could never get out of that car and just keep driving and driving and driving it?
Well, any car that you could win a race with, and uh, the car that actually really the car that I felt I could win every race was the Lotus 78, actually in 77. Somehow, because there was still a lot of the mechanical side that was very, the aerodynamics was not as powerful, but somehow I really understood that car well. And I don't know, it's almost more, there's not too many races that you feel like today they have to beat me. As long as if the car stays together, there's no
Yeah.
way that I'm gonna. And I felt that way. I think the World Championship should have been a lot easier for me in '77 than in '78. And but again, as far as falling in love with any race car, is the one that you win a race with.
That's a great answer. Okay, so there's lots of boys and girls out there that in their future they see themselves maybe as a NASCAR driver, a Formula One driver, an IndyCar driver, or a super sports car driver. Do you have any advice for them about how they should start, what they should do day to day? Because as you mentioned in your beginnings, when you were 14 at that Grand Prix, every day you had something in your brain that said, I'm going to do this. So what would you tell the kids today?
It's very simple. Follow your dreams. Follow your dreams. If you really believe, you really want something badly enough, there are ways to get there. Trust me, trust me. And if I had a specific follow this and that, I'd bottle it and sell it. There's no such a thing as that. It's an individual thing, but you have to, if you really, really want to do it, you'll find a way to get there. but it's only burning desire that you need. If you have that, you will achieve whatever you're after. Trust me.
Mario Andretti, thank you very much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it. Are you going to be at CODA again this year?
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd love to, maybe if we can, sit down and have a beer. Do you drink beer or, yeah, drink a little beer or something? What's that?
I'll have a beer. Sure.
Great. Okay. Well, I look forward to it. And again, thank you very much. You know, as a kid that was watching you, wasn't a kid. I'm about 8 to 10 years younger than you, but still, you never think at those times that, you know, one day you're going to meet them and one day you're going to be able to talk to them. And it's an absolute privilege and a joy. And thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure, Jonathan. My pleasure indeed. I hope I answered the question because
it was great.
Ramble on. I get accused by my girls. You know, don't ramble on so much.
So the thing is, you know, a lot, and one of the things I'm trying to do with the Formula One News Hour is, you know, we kind of start every week. We have the history of Formula One, because I think in order to appreciate it, and maybe I've got one more question, but in order to appreciate it, you have to know the history. You have to know the people that got it to where it is today, the pioneers, the guys you guys took a tremendous amount of risks in those early days to get it here. So my last question, I've got one more question. The United States has had a Formula One Grand Prix for a lot of years and tried in different cities. But before Austin, I think it was Indianapolis. And for 5 years it went there and not a lot of people showed up. So it kind of fatted out. And then when it came here to Austin, we all had kind of the same idea. Is it going to be here for a couple of years and then it's going to petter out? But no, I think last year the crowds here were incredible. Now we had Miami, and this year we're adding Las Vegas. What do you attribute now the success of Formula One today compared to yesterday over here in the United States?
The investment made in Austin, that was magic. Trust me, because I mean, that's a world-class facility, and Formula One needed that to have stability in these United States. Because after we left way back when, Watkins Glen,
yes,
became a gypsy. You know, like when you get on, you know, street courses and so forth, and you know, it's that weekend and that's it. You know, just you put up tent and then you take tent down and all that, and there's instability in that. And unfortunately, in the Indianapolis, you thought, okay, you know, that would be, but there's something about that Indianapolis Formula One took second stage there, because the big stage is the oval. And somehow the ambiance wasn't there, you know, because you could have 100,000 people, you know, watching the race and there's nobody. You can see it because all the grandstands are empty.
Yes.
You know what I mean? So there's no ambiance. So it didn't have a long life, unfortunately. That's the way I see it anyway. But going back, you know, Austin did it. And then having been successful there, all of a sudden, oh, let's try Miami. And they said, oh, maybe it's too close. No, it's not. The more the merrier. It was done right, and Miami was done beautifully. Now there's a big investment in Las Vegas, and you're not investing just to go in and out. And so here again, it's about doing it right, and at the right time, with the interest actually being just all of a sudden activated through the Netflix series, Drive to Survive. There's something magic that happened there. And so you feed that balloon, you know, and so Formula One is at a good place right now in the United States, no question. But it started with the investment in Austin.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I'll let you go now. You've been very generous with your time. And I look forward to that beer here in Austin in the fall.
But take care.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.